The rain fell hard over the wooden roof of the lonely cabin. Eli sat inside, near a weak fire, warming his hands outside. The cold wind howled like a wild animal. He had lived alone on this quiet planet for 3 years. He liked the silence. The peace, the simple life, no wars, no noise, no lies, just nature and quiet days. But that night was different. A strange feeling pulled at Eli's chest, like something was coming, something not normal. Then he heard it, a knock, soft and slow, barely there. He stood up quickly, his chair creaking under him. No one ever came. Here, not at this hour, not in this storm. He opened the door, and what he saw made him freeze. A figure stood in the rain, shaking, dripping wet. She was thin, too thin, with dark silver skin and glowing eyes. Her clothes were torn, her hands bloody, and her lips trembling. She looked like she hadn't eaten in days, maybe longer then. She collapsed, her knees giving way. Eli moved fast, catching her before she hit the ground. Her body was cold like ice. He didn't think, he just acted. He pulled her inside, set her near the fire, grabbed blankets, wrapped them around her. Then ran to the kitchen for food. He came back with warm soup. She didn't open her eyes, but she moved slightly. He lifted her head gently and helped her drink. She coughed, then swallowed bit by bit. The color returned to her face, but she still didn't speak, not one word. Eli studied her quietly. She was not human, but he had seen many aliens before. Still, something about her was different. She looked broken, like something terrible had happened. Her arms had strange marks, burns, maybe shocks. And around her neck was a faint red ring, like a collar had been there. Eli sat beside her, not speaking. He didn't want to scare her. She needed rest, warmth, and safety. He would give her that. Nothing more, nothing less, but inside, questions. Burned in his mind, who was she? Where had she come from? And why was she left to die alone? Hours passed. The storm outside grew louder, but inside it was quiet. She slept, breathing slowly now, her body wrapped tight. Eli didn't sleep. He just watched the fire, and every so often, he looked at the girl beside him near dawn. She stirred, her eyes opened, weak and full of fear. She looked around the room, saw Eli, and froze. Her hand reached for something, but there was nothing there. She backed up against the wall like a scared animal. Eli raised his hands slowly, showing he meant no harm. "You're safe," he said softly. But she didn't understand. She spoke in a language he couldn't follow. Her voice was low and hoarse, like she hadn't spoken in days. Then she stopped, and tears filled her eyes. Eli didn't move. He pointed to the soup, then to her. She hesitated, then slowly took the bowl and drank. She was still scared, still unsure, but she was alive and she was starting to trust. The morning sun came through the window, lighting the room with a soft glow. Eli stood and walked to the window. No ships, no signs of others, just trees and rain-soaked ground. He turned back to look at her. She was watching him now, her eyes still cautious, but in those eyes he saw something else. Not just fear, hope, maybe just a little. He nodded gently. "You're safe here," he said again. She didn't reply. But this time, she didn't look away. She pulled the blanket tighter around herself and leaned closer to the fire. Eli stepped into the kitchen to make more food. His hands moved out of habit, but his mind raced. Whoever she was, someone had hurt her. Someone had tried to make her disappear. But she hadn't disappeared. She had found his cabin, and now she was here. Eli didn't know what the future would bring. But one thing was clear. This woman needed help, and he would not turn her away. Not now, not ever. The sound of a bowl crashing to the floor snapped Eli awake. He rushed into the main room, his heart beating fast. There she was, the alien woman, standing barefoot, eyes wide, shoulders shaking. She held a knife in her hand, not to attack, but to protect herself. Her back was pressed against the wall, and her breathing was quick and sharp. Eli stopped moving, hands raised slowly. "It's okay," he whispered, voice calm like the early morning breeze. But she didn't understand his words, only his tone. Her glowing eyes darted between his face and the doorway. She looked ready to run, ready to jump through the window if needed. He noticed the soup bowl on the floor, spilled and broken. She must have tried to serve herself, then panicked when she heard his footsteps. She didn't trust him, not yet. Eli gently moved to the side, away from the doorway. He pointed to the table, then to himself, then slowly sat down. He kept his hands on the table where she could see them. She didn't move, not for a full minute. Then, like a cornered animal deciding to stay still instead of flee, she lowered the knife. She placed it on the floor with shaky fingers and slowly sat down on the other side of the room. Her eyes never left him. She didn't blink much, didn't speak. But Eli could tell something was changing. She was still scared, but now she was trying to understand, trying to see if he was truly safe or just pretending. Eli stood up, walked to the kitchen slowly, and returned with bread and warm tea. He placed it on the table, then stepped back. She looked at the food, then at him, unsure. After a pause, she crawled over and grabbed it fast, pulling it close like someone might take it away. She ate like she hadn't eaten in weeks, chewing fast, eyes alert, hands trembling. Eli didn't interrupt. He just watched quietly. He wondered how long she had been on the run, what kind of place she came from, what kind of monsters chased her. When she finished eating, she looked around the room slowly, then pointed at a spoon on the table and said a single word in her own language. Eli paused, then repeated the word softly. She nodded, pointed again, and said it once more, slower this time. It was a lesson, a test, maybe a small bridge between them. She wanted to learn, or maybe she wanted him to learn. Either way, it was a start. For the next hour, they sat together, pointing at things, saying words. She spoke a little more, just short sounds, never full sentences, but she was watching him closely, copying sounds he made. Her voice was soft and raspy, like wind through dry leaves. And every time he got a word right, she gave a tiny smile. It was the first time Eli had seen her smile, and it felt like sunlight breaking through a cold cloud later. As the sun rose higher, she pointed to herself, then placed her hand on her chest and said, "Saline." Eli blinked, then repeated it. "Saline." She nodded once, then looked at him, waiting. He understood, placed a hand on his own chest, and said, "Eli." That moment, that small exchange, felt bigger than it should have. Names meant something, even across stars. She looked away quickly, maybe shy, maybe sad. But she didn't seem scared anymore, at least not like before. Eli started fixing the broken bowl and cleaning the table. Saline followed him with her eyes but didn't move from her corner. Outside, the rain had stopped and sunlight touched the window glass inside. Something had shifted too, like the air was warmer now. Like maybe she believed, just a little, that she wouldn't be hurt here. Later that night, as Eli sat near the fire reading an old book, he felt movement behind him. Saline came quietly, wrapped in the blanket he had given her. She didn't sit too close, but she sat nearby, her gaze on the flames. Her shoulders were no longer tense, her face no longer frozen in fear, and though she didn't say another word, her presence spoke enough. She was still healing, still unsure of the world, but she was here, and for now, that was all that mattered. The sound of the wooden floor creaking gently in the night made Eli open his eyes. He didn't move, just listened. Another step, soft and slow, like someone trying not to wake him, but he was already awake. The room was dim, lit only by the dying fire. He sat up quietly and looked toward the noise. There, standing near the window, was Saline. She wasn't running or hiding, just standing still, staring out into the night sky. Moonlight touched her face, and something glimmered on her cheek. It was a tear. Eli stood and walked toward her slowly. She didn't turn or flinch, just stayed there with her arms wrapped around herself. When he reached her side, she finally whispered a word. "Stars," she said in broken English, her voice soft and heavy. Eli nodded. "Yes, stars," he said gently. She pointed, then whispered more words in her own language, slow, quiet, filled with sadness. Eli couldn't understand. But he didn't interrupt. He just stood beside her, watching the same sky. After a moment, she looked at him and asked a strange question. "You safe?" she said, her eyes searching his face. Eli blinked, then answered softly, "Yes, you are safe." She shook her head slowly, then touched her own chest. "No, you safe?" It took him a second to understand. She was asking if she was a danger to him. He smiled sadly and replied, "You're not dangerous." She didn't smile back, but something in her eyes changed. She stepped closer, just a little then. Without warning, she hugged him. Her body was still thin, still weak, but the hug was real, tight and full of silent pain. She didn't cry out loud, but he felt the shaking in her shoulders. That was the first night she chose to sleep near him. Still wrapped in her blanket, still on the floor, but closer now. Not across the room. That small change meant more to Eli than she would ever know. Days passed, and their small world grew bigger. Celine began exploring the cabin. She touched the tools in Eli's workshop, stared at the flickering light bulbs. One afternoon, she found a radio, picked it up and listened closely. When it made static sounds, she smiled like it was magic. Eli watched her silently, amazed by her growing curiosity. She helped him cook, clumsy but eager. Once she dropped an entire bowl of flour on the floor. Eli laughed without thinking. Celine looked at him, confused at first, then giggled softly. Her laugh was small and broken, but beautiful. It was the first time he had heard it, and it stayed in his mind long after. Eli tried to teach her words each day. He pointed to objects and named them. Spoon, chair, window, fire. She repeated them with effort, sometimes getting them wrong, sometimes getting them right, but she was learning fast. He was surprised how quickly she picked up meanings. It was like she had studied humans before, but maybe from far away. Then one evening, as the fire crackled and the rain returned outside, she sat close beside him, her eyes focused. She tapped her chest and said, "Celine." Then she tapped his chest and said, "Eli." Then slowly she said, "Thank you." Eli. His breath caught for a second. She had spoken clearly, like she practiced those words all day. He smiled warmly. "You're welcome," he replied. But she wasn't done. She looked down, her hands twisting nervously. Then, in a shaky voice, she said, "They sell me." Eli stared at her, unsure if he heard right. Her eyes were far away now, like seeing something only she could see. "They take, cage, hit, hungry. Always." Her voice broke with each word. Eli felt his stomach turn cold. He had suspected, but now it was clear she had been taken, used, treated like less than a person. Celine looked at him again, her eyes wet. She didn't cry, not like humans did, but her pain was deep, old and heavy. Eli placed a hand gently on hers. "You're not a slave anymore," he said quietly. "You're free here." She didn't speak, just held his hand tightly. They sat like that for a long time. No more words, no more lessons, just silence. But it wasn't empty. It was filled with something deeper: trust. The kind that grows slowly between two souls who were both broken, but still breathing. Asterisk. The strange sound in the sky came without warning. It was deep, heavy, and distant. But getting closer, Eli stepped outside, his eyes scanning the clouds. Above the forest, a dark shadow moved across the morning light. It wasn't a bird, and it wasn't a cargo ship. It was too smooth, too quiet, too controlled. His heart tightened as he watched the object glide slowly overhead. It didn't land, but it circled the hills once before vanishing beyond the trees. Eli waited, listened, and watched, but the forest returned to silence, as if nothing had happened. Back inside the cabin, Celine was standing by the window. Her face was pale, her hands trembling slightly. She had seen it too, and her reaction made Eli's chest feel heavy. She wasn't just afraid, she looked like she had seen a ghost. He moved toward her slowly. "Do you know that ship?" he asked. She didn't answer, just nodded once, then sat down with her back against the wall, her arms wrapped around her knees, her head buried in them. Eli had never seen her like this. Not even when she first arrived. Something about that ship had broken something inside her again. He sat beside her, waiting. After some time, she looked up with red eyes and whispered, "They find me." Eli shook his head. "We're far from the city. No one will find you here." But Saline slowly pointed toward the roof. "They smell. They track." Ellie's blood ran cold. He didn't know how, but it didn't matter, she believed it. And that meant it was real. He stood quickly and went to the back of the cabin. There was a trapdoor hidden beneath an old rug. It led to a storage basement. Cold and dark. He spent hours clearing it out, building a safe space, extra blankets, food, light, and even a signal jammer he had bought long ago. Saline watched silently from the doorway. When he was done, he looked at her and said, "If they come, you hide here." She walked slowly to the stairs and looked down into the shadows. Then she turned and said softly, "You come too?" Eli paused, surprised. He hadn't thought about that. He had only planned to protect her. But in that moment, he realized she didn't want to run alone again. She wanted someone beside her, someone who wouldn't leave her behind. "Yes," Eli said, "I'll come too." And the small smile she gave him lit up the whole room. That night, the wind howled through the trees again. Eli couldn't sleep, his mind full of worry. He sat by the window, holding a rifle he hadn't touched in years. Saline sat beside the fire, arms around her legs. Watching him closely, she didn't ask questions, didn't cry. But he could see it in her eyes. She was remembering something. After a long silence, she finally spoke. "They put color. They make us fight." Eli turned to her slowly. She was staring into the fire like it was showing her the past. "We were many. Taken from stars, cages. Numbers." She touched her neck. "Shock, no food. No name." Eli clenched his fists. He had heard stories, rumors about black markets and hidden camps. But hearing it from her lips made it real in a way he wasn't ready for. "They watch. Laugh when we bleed," Saline continued. Then her voice grew quiet. "I run, but they hunt. Always." She looked at him, her voice breaking slightly. "Why, you help me?" Eli took a deep breath, then answered, "Because when I needed help, no one came." He looked at her gently. "But I don't want to be like them." She stared at him, her eyes deep and searching. Then slowly, she stood and walked to him. She reached out and touched his hand. A quiet moment passed, long and full of meaning, and in that silence, something unspoken was shared, a promise maybe, or a silent bond. Outside, the sky remained dark, but inside the cabin, a quiet strength began to grow. They knew danger was coming, but they also knew they wouldn't face it alone. The old recording device was never meant to be found. It was buried deep inside the cloth bag Saline had carried when she first arrived. Eli only noticed it when the bag slipped from a shelf and hit the floor. Out rolled a small round disc, dusty, scratched, and silent. He picked it up gently, unsure what it was. But when Saline saw it, her face turned white. She rushed over, snatched the disc from his hand, and held it close to her chest. Her lips moved, whispering words he couldn't understand. It was more than just a tool. It was a memory, a piece of her past. Eli didn't speak, just watched as she slowly walked to the fire. She sat down and stared at the disc for a long time. Then, without a word, she handed it back to him. "Play," she said softly, her voice shaking. Eli nodded and connected the disc to his old universal reader. The screen lit up, blinking blue, and then a voice filled the cabin. It was in Saline's language, strong and full of power. A woman stood in the recording tall, proud, wearing royal armor. Her features were sharp, her presence impossible to ignore. Beside her stood two others, warriors with silver tattoos. Then Saline stepped into view, much younger, wearing fine clothes and a golden crest. Eli stared at the screen, frozen. The Saline he knew looked nothing like the one in the recording. But the eyes were the same, sad, deep, and full of quiet fire. The recording continued, showing a ceremony, a family gathering, and then screams, smoke, weapons drawn. The video cut to black. Celine was silent now, her hands resting in her lap. That was last day, she said slowly. Eli swallowed hard. You were royalty? She gave a sad smile. I was daughter of voice. Council speaker. Eli couldn't speak. She had been important, powerful, and now she was hunted like prey. She looked at him carefully, as if waiting for him to step away, to treat her differently. But Eli didn't move. You're still you, he said. That hasn't changed. And for the first time since he met her, Celine's eyes filled with tears. Later that evening, they sat together near the fire. The wind outside had gone still, but Eli's thoughts were racing. Celine had shared her truth, her identity. But it also meant something darker if someone knew she was alive. They'd never stop searching. She wasn't just a runaway. She was the lost daughter of a powerful house. He turned to her and asked, Why come here, this planet? She answered slowly, I heard story, humans help. Don't sell. Her voice was hopeful, but also tired. I ran for many moons. Hid in trash ships. Found this place. Eli couldn't imagine the pain, the danger, the fear, but he knew one thing, he would never let her go back to that life. Then a loud beep echoed from the old comm unit. A warning signal motion near the ridge. Eli jumped to his feet, grabbed the viewer, and scanned the tree line. A single figure stood there, too far to see clearly, but they weren't moving. Just watching the cabin from a distance. Then they turned and vanished into the trees. Celine stood behind him, silent, her body shaking again. They found me, she whispered. Eli lowered the viewer and placed a hand on her shoulder. Then, we fight, he said, but inside he knew it wouldn't be easy. They weren't just fighting for safety anymore. They were fighting for a future that might never come. Still, Celine didn't look away. Her eyes were strong, her voice firm. I will not run again, she said, and Eli believed her. The forest was too quiet. Even the wind refused to move the leaves. Eli stood at the cabin door, his rifle in hand, his eyes locked on the shadows. Something was coming. He could feel it in his bones. Not animals, not wild weather, something with purpose. Inside the cabin, Celine pressed her back to the wall. She held a tool in one hand, a small energy spark stick from her escape. She had repaired it using Eli's workshop. It wasn't a weapon made for war, but it could burn through metal and bone if needed. The first knock didn't come from the door, it came from the roof. A soft metallic tap, then another. Eli aimed his rifle upward as the second noise echoed. He didn't shout, didn't speak, only waited. He had no idea how many there were, but they were trained and they were close. Then came the voice, filtered through a helmet, cold and direct. Return the property, human, and we will leave you in peace. Eli didn't answer. Celine stepped beside him and whispered, They call me property. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were full of fire. She was done being silent. Eli raised his voice. There's no property here, only people. No reply came, just a small hiss. Then the sound of energy cutters on the back wall. They're trying to break in, he said. Grabbing Celine's hand, they ran toward the basement hatch, but halfway down the stairs, the front wall exploded inward. The blast knocked Eli off his feet. Celine turned fast and fired her spark stick. A scream echoed through the smoke. One of the intruders fell, armor melting on his chest, but two more stepped through the broken wall. Weapons raised, Eli stood, bleeding from his forehead, and shot once, twice. One target fell, the other ducked. Celine pulled him toward the stairs, shouting something. In her language, they stumbled into the basement, and she slammed the hatch shut. Eli leaned against the wall. Breathing hard, she checked his head, her fingers moving fast. I'm fine, he said, even though he could barely stay upright. She opened a hidden case in the wall. Inside was an old healing injector, one she had fixed days ago, just in case. She pressed it to Eli's neck and activated it. A cold rush filled his veins, and the pain in his head began to fade. But they could still hear footsteps above, slow, searching, closing in. Saline knelt beside him, her hand gripping his tightly. "I fight now," she said. "No more run." Eli grabbed her shoulder. "No, we fight together," she smiled. But there was sadness behind it. "I don't want you hurt," she said. He replied with a small smile. Too late for that. The ceiling above cracked. One of the intruders had found the hatch. Eli raised his rifle. Saline raised her spark stick. The hatch burst open, and a tall figure in black armor dropped in. But he didn't attack. He hesitated, eyes locking on Saline. Then, in a deep voice, he said something in her native tongue. Saline's body froze. Then she whispered, "He was one of my guards." Eli didn't lower his weapon. The man removed his helmet. His face was marked by scars and regret. "I failed you," he said to her, "but I can help you escape now." Saline didn't blink. She took a slow step forward and said, "Help us, and I will trust you." The man nodded, pulled a small disc from his belt, and smashed it against the wall. A blinding light filled the basement outside. A ship's engines roared to life. "Now," he said, "we run together." Eli grabbed Saline's hand. For the first time they had an ally, but this was far from over. The war wasn't behind them, it was just beginning. The stars didn't look the same anymore, not to Saline, not to Eli. They weren't cold, distant lights in the sky. They were reminders of everything lost, everything survived, and everything still to come. The ship they escaped in flew low over the forest. Quiet and fast, the man who once hunted Saline now flew it for her. He had no home to return to. His loyalty was broken, his honor long gone. But in helping her escape, he had found a small piece of it again. For 3 days they flew without stopping. No signals, no messages, no lights, just silence and distance. Eli sat beside Saline the whole time. She didn't speak much, just stared at the stars, as if searching for someone. On the 4th day, they landed in a hidden human outpost. Deep in the far side of the galaxy, beyond any trade routes, there, they found peace, or at least something close to it. For the first time, Saline walked freely in daylight without hiding her face. The other humans stared, but didn't judge. They saw her not as a threat, but as a survivor. Weeks passed. Eli found work repairing machines. Just like before, Saline started helping in the medical bay, using what she knew to heal others. Every day, her voice grew stronger, her smile a little wider. She laughed more, and sometimes cried when no one watched. But something else began to grow, something warm, quiet, and unspoken between her and Eli. It showed in the way she waited for him each night, in the way she touched his arm without fear, in the way he watched her like she was the most precious thing he had ever seen. Then one quiet evening, while they watched the sun sink behind the hills, Saline turned to him, asked a question, not in her broken language, not in fear, but in clear, soft English. "Will you stay with me forever?" Eli didn't answer right away. He just looked at her, seeing all the scars she carried, not just on her skin, but deep within. And yet, despite it all, she had survived. She had smiled again, trusted again, loved again. He reached into his coat and pulled out something small. A silver ring, simple, human-made, shaped from a tool part, not fancy but honest. He had worked on it for weeks without telling her. "I was hoping you'd ask," he said. Saline laughed, her eyes full of light. Then she reached into her own pouch and brought out a strange, glowing band made of alien crystal, passed down through her bloodline. "I wanted to give you this," she whispered. They placed the rings on each other's hands. No crowd, no music, no grand words, just them, together, alive. And not alone. That night, the stars above looked different again. Not because they had changed, but because the two souls watching them were no longer lost. They were home in each other. They had found safety, freedom, and something they never expected. Love that crossed the stars.